What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham G.S. and Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network, Peacock, and on Vices. Today we're talking Season 5, Episode 7 of Dark Side of the Ring, Chris Adams, the Gentleman and the Demon. Quite the interesting episode here. I mean, I knew more about Chris Adams than I did Chris Colt, someone I had never heard of before in my life before last week's episode. I knew and had heard of Chris Adams before, but didn't really know much about his life or career aside from the fact that he had trained Stone Cold Steve Austin. I thought for some reason he had trained Shawn Michaels. That was obviously Jose Lothario. How could I forget that? He had trained Stone Cold Steve Austin, which they reference in this episode. They don't get quotes from him. They use an excerpt from an interview that Austin must have done years ago or whatever. Maybe even his podcast, talking about working with Chris. But beyond that, they don't have Steve Austin on the episode. But overall, I thought this was quite the ride, though, so let's get into it. They open up the episode with the daughter. We hear from his daughter, Jade Adams, and his son as well, who is Chris Adams Jr. The daughter, like, one of the first things that she says is, I don't care what anyone says of all the stories about him, he was a great person. He was a great father and a great person. And as soon as I hear her say that, I'm thinking, okay, this guy definitely is not a great person. If they feel the need to reiterate that or to preface the episode with that, he definitely was not a great person. And sure enough, he was not, which they make pretty clear throughout the episode. They mention how he was the innovator of the super kick. That's probably why I was thinking of Shawn Michaels, because Shawn Michaels pretty much, I would assume, stole the super kick from Chris Adams and used it as the Sweet Chin Music, obviously, in WWE. They talk about how he did 14 years of hardcore judo. Started dating a woman named Jeannie Clark and incorporated her into his act into wrestling. And we hear a lot from his brother throughout the episode as well, who I think had also done judo and may have been involved with the wrestling thing. I'm not 100% sure. But they share this weird story where they get married, they move to LA, she gets pregnant, and her first red flag was when they were at the beach one day, and she caught him looking at other women. So sure enough, soon after, he had to go to Mexico for a bit. Jeannie went back to the UK while he was in Mexico to give birth to Jade. And there were periods where he just wouldn't come home. And not come home for like days at a time. So she knew at that point the relationship was pretty much over. They separate. He goes to WCCW in Dallas, where he kind of got his start and became really successful on his own and also in a tag team as well. They also share a story about how he almost choked a driver to death for being late to a show. Because you always, and we hear from Kevin Von Erich, it was great to hear from him. We hear from him, and he talks about how if you were like an hour late or an hour early to the show, then you were on time. The driver, for whatever reason, had gotten lost, and Chris was freaking the fuck out about it and started choking the driver. And they all reference both, not just Kerry, but a few other people that were interviewed for the episode, including Boo Ray. I don't know why the fuck his nickname was Boo Ray, but we get to him later. He also had said whenever Chris got mad, he had like the demon eyes, like his eyes would like flash red almost, which is where the demon aspect of this episode title comes from. So that was also kind of evident during the choking of the driver incident. And he wasn't even drunk, and they had mentioned, Kevin Von Erich had mentioned, he wasn't even drunk. So that was a pretty interesting incident. He started teaming with Gino Hernandez, another former subject, Dark Side of the Ring. I mentioned Kevin Von Erich before. I think I said Kerry by accident. I meant Kevin. Also another former subject, the Dark Side of the Ring. So they got all the Dark Side of the Ring subjects in like one episode here, which they've done before. They showed during his time in WCW later on a clip of Buff Bagwell briefly. So I feel like they do this intentionally where they try to like interconnect all the Dark Side of the Ring episodes from past seasons. But anyway, that team kind of gets him to the main event scene. And that was also around the time when the Von Erichs were on the come up and the Freebirds and a few other people. So there was only so much spotlight to go around. But he also partied really, really hard with alcohol, drugs. Hernandez ended up dying of cocaine overdose in 1986, again, which they get into in his episode. And then from there, his drinking gets completely out of control. He meets a woman named Toni Collins, and she seemingly set him straight for a while, but clearly not permanently, because he still had issues after that. He gets drunk on a flight and starts punching a stewardess, because what had happened was the flight hadn't taken off yet, they say, and because there was a delay. And I don't know if they do this now, but because they were late, because the plane was late, they were giving the people on the plane drinks, thinking nothing would really come of it, but obviously this was also an issue it wasn't the exact same thing, but another Dark Side of the Ring reference here, Plane Ride from Hell, which they covered back in Season 2, Season 3. And it was a very similar circumstance where specifically Chris Adams had the alcohol, plane takes off, he just gets completely reckless and will not listen to the stewardess and punches her. Now, he got arrested, but only for 3 months, which to me seemed completely fucking ridiculous. I feel like if you do that sort of thing nowadays, you'd be in jail for life, but I could be wrong. Not willing to try it, don't want to find out, but that seems like too little of a sentence to me. He ended up opening a wrestling school, and Steve Austin, who I mentioned earlier, one of his first students, Jeannie ended up getting put in the angle with Steve, with Chris and Steve. So they brought in Jeannie to be with Steve Austin, and they mentioned they were dating, but I think they were talking from a storyline standpoint. I don't know if they were dating in real life. I don't think so. They had made they kind of observed, they were together. I think they meant from a wrestling standpoint. I could be wrong, and they were together in real life. I'm not exactly sure. But she was put with Steve on the show for an angle and a feud with Chris Adams, who had trained Steve. So it was a kind of like real-life drama interseeping into storylines. And someone had even mentioned, a friend of Chris's that was interviewed for the episode, even mentioned that there was real-life drama there. And they had mentioned right before that, there was no drama. They enjoyed working together, and they all liked it. And then this other guy says, there was some real-life drama there. So I guess believe what you want. Jeannie thinks that Chris was jealous that both she and Steve ended up taking their act to WCW while he was kind of left behind in WCCW and wherever else. He beat up his wife. They mentioned that. I guess they were in not a car accident. They almost got hit by a fucking semi-truck coming down the road. I don't know if they were parked in the road for some reason. Either they were arguing or dealing with their kid. The son is from the relationship with Tony. The daughter, Jade, is from the relationship with Jeannie, I believe, for the record. So they were stuck in the road, and then he gets really fucking pissed, beat up his wife, punched her, at least. I mean, he had no issue clearly punching the stewardess, who was also a woman, so he clearly had no issue punching women for whatever reason. And they mentioned it was bad enough to where she had to get facial reconstructive surgery, at least facial surgery. And that's pretty bad. So thankfully, she ends up leaving, that being Tony. Brings the kid with her, Chris Adams Jr., They talk about how he rips off Rod Price's hair. I believe that was the gentleman's name, no pun intended there. Rod Price during a promotion, in a promotion at an event where the guy had not hair plugs, but his hair was thinning, so he was wearing a piece, they say, or whatever it was. And the hair was really, really in there, and there was an unwritten rule, an unspoken rule, don't touch the hair, don't pull on it, whatever. He does it anyway just because he could, and he fucking rips it out, and there was blood everywhere. They said it required, hundreds of staples, which is crazy, or stitches, I mean. Just really, really gross shit. So he ends up getting brought into WCW in 1997, and he wasn't really happy with the fact that he was being used as a jobber. I don't know if he was out of his prime at that point. I wasn't following his career, so I have no idea. But this is 1997 we're talking about in WCW, the peak of WCW. So there was no way he was ever getting beyond a certain level in that company in that year specifically. But he wasn't happy with being used as a jobber. Ended up getting fired a short while later for getting a DUI, so that's how he got fired from WCW. That was when he got into GHB and moves in with a guy named Boo Ray. How they met, maybe they mentioned it, I might have missed it. Yeah, the guy's name was Boo Ray, was his nickname, not his real actual name. But they mentioned his real name, but I'm just going to call him Boo Ray. The guy was happy to bring him in because he felt like, he's on tough times. He would go months without a match, without being paid, whatever. But he also felt like he was being used with this guy, that being Chris Adams, living with him and just living with him and not really contributing at all, and he felt like Boo Ray did, that he was being used in that respect, which makes complete sense. They talk about how Chris met a girl named Linda, and they took GHB overnight, and they were partying, all this other sort of stuff. Boo Ray goes to bed and says, listen, I don't really want that shit in here. You could take that and do that on your own time somewhere else. He did it anyway. He did it in the house. He woke up, Boo Ray did, in the middle of the night around 4 a.m., went to go check him out, or went to go check up on him, and they were both passed out. And when he tried to wake him up, she specifically was unresponsive. And she ended up dying. I'm thinking, there's going to be some sort of legal issue here. No, she died. And he felt responsible. And I'm like, no shit. I would hope he felt responsible for the fact that she died because of whatever shit that you gave her. Chris felt responsible, that is. and he was charged with manslaughter. It was this whole thing. So he threatened suicide, all this other sort of stuff. He ended up attacking Boo-Ray later on. I don't know if he was living with him at this point, or I think it was after I think Boo-Ray was like, listen, dude, you got to go. You can't be here anymore. They ended up meeting up, and they were at Boo-Ray's house. Chris took a bedpost, a piece of the bedpost in Boo-Ray's room or whatever, and started attacking him with it. And Boo-Ray recites or recalls the story where he's like trying to gouge his eyes out, all this other sort of stuff. And it was fucking gross. And you're thinking the only real way that he can defend himself here is the way that he did. He had a gun at bedside. This is his side of the story, but the way he talks about it, it kind of seems like this was the way that it went down. He shot him. And he shot him in a way where he was just hoping to wound him, obviously, not kill him. But he shot him in the heart and he died. So it was deemed in court as self-defense because they thought, listen, there was no other way that you could have defended yourself. I mean, what else are you going to do? Boo-Ray thinks in retrospect that had he just not done that, he probably would have died. The brother doesn't think so, though. The brother of Chris, who was interviewed for the episode, said, oh yeah, no, I don't think it was self-defense. And I'm thinking, what the fuck else would it be? Like, would he have just killed him? I mean, I guess, but for what reason, Just very random. So they talk about his funeral, wrestling fans showing up to the funeral, big turnout for that. The daughter, who is interviewed throughout and is very defensive of the father. And I get it, he's the dad, but she comes across as completely fucking delusional. She says that she wants Chris, the dad, to be remembered as an amazing athlete and a kind father. And the other son kind of says the same thing. Chris Adams Jr. kind of says something similar, not really defending the way that he acted. He was there, I think, when he beat up the mom. So he saw it firsthand. But I think, him talking about his own interactions with Chris as a father, he had mentioned, oh yeah, he's a good father. There's a difference between being a good father and a good person. And he very clearly, very evidently, from everything that was detailed in this documentary, was not a good person. But the daughter doesn't seem to think so, because she says at the very beginning of the episode, oh yeah, he was a great guy. He was a great person. I don't care what anyone says. Okay, whatever. A very interesting episode, though. Again, knew of Chris Adams. Didn't know any of this stuff. I knew he probably wasn't a great guy, but this was crazy. This was a definite dark side of the ring episode. Perfect fit for this show, and it just kind of makes you think you would think by season 5 they start to scrape at the bottom of the barrel. They are with some of these episodes. They don't really deserve to be an episode. This one, I'm surprised they didn't do this one sooner. This was crazy. So check it out right now on Vice, Season 5, Episode 7, Chris Adams, the Gentleman and the Demon. I think there's 3 episodes left. Next week I know is Sensational Sherry. I know they're doing an episode on Kurt Angle and Black Friday, or Black Tuesday, whatever it was. The famous WWF incident, event, whatever, from decades ago. That'll be covered on a future episode. So I think those are the final 3 remaining. There might be more episodes. I think there's only 10. I could be wrong. I'm glad they're just doing all 10 at once and not breaking it up like, 5 now, 5 in 6 months. They're just doing it consecutively, which I like. But that review should be up next week, so check that out. All my other Dark Side of the Ring reviews down below in the description box. Every Dark Side of the Ring review that I've ever done, dating back to Season 1, is here on the channel, so check it out when you get a chance. Thank you guys for checking out my review of Dark Side of the Ring for this week here on WWE Network and Chill. I appreciate the support. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. Have an awesome one, guys. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.